2 years scouring every corner of the planet to find someone who could play Michael Jackson. They held open casting calls across multiple continents. They auditioned hundreds of professional actors, trained dancers, and even world-famous impersonators. Top casting directors reviewed thousands of video submissions, and after all that time, all that money, and all that effort, the answer was living right there inside the Jackson family the whole time. But here is what almost nobody talks about. Said something that really stuck with me. He said that nobody will ever portray someone in a biopic who already carries that much of the person's DNA inside them. Think about what that really means. Jafar did not have to study hours of footage to learn how to move like a Jackson. Those movement patterns are literally in his blood. The way he walks, how he holds himself, the subtle hand gestures, these are not things he practiced from YouTube tutorials. These are inherited family traits that go back generations. The Jackson family has a very specific physical language. If you have ever watched Michael, Janet, Jermaine, or any of the brothers perform, you notice a certain fluidity, a smoothness that is unmistakably Jackson. Jafar was born with that. But there is more, his voice. Jafar naturally has that Jackson family vocal tone, that warm, soulful quality that runs through the entire bloodline. It is not an imitation, it is authentic. Producer Graham King said he was shocked by how naturally Jafar part of the equation. What about knowing Michael as a real human being, not a celebrity? This is where things get deeply personal. Jafar has actual living memories of his uncle Michael. These are not stories he read in magazines or watched in documentaries. He was at Neverland Ranch. He played hide and seek with Michael. He went on the amusement rides. He sat next to him and watched movies during family gatherings. Now consider what that means for playing this role. An outside actor could study Michael Jackson for 5 years. They could watch every interview, every concert, every behind-the-scenes clip, but they would still only know the public Michael Jackson, the performer, the icon. Jafar knew the private Michael, the uncle who laughed with family, the person behind the superstar, the man who existed when the cameras were turned off. He grew up hearing first-hand stories from his grandmother Katherine, from his father Jermaine, from the people who actually lived those moments. These are not tabloid rumors, these are family truths, and here is exactly why that matters for a biopic. When you are portraying someone, you need to understand not just what they did, but why they did it. You need to understand the emotional weight they carried, the pressure, the loneliness, the love. Jafar understands what it means to carry the Jackson name because he has carried it his entire life. He lived through the media frenzy after Michael's death. He knows the burden of that legacy from the inside. Speaking of that burden, this brings us to the moment I mentioned at the beginning, the moment that changed everything. Graham King met Jafar over 2 years before the casting was officially announced. This was early in the process. They were still considering other actors, still running the worldwide search. But something happened in that first meeting that King could not ignore. King later said it became immediately clear that Jafar was the only person who could take on this role. There was something incredibly powerful in his presence. Director Antoine Fuqua noticed it too. He talked about Jafar having a spiritual connection to Michael. Not just a physical resemblance, not just talent, but something deeper. But here is what most people do not know about that meeting. They did not just sit and have a conversation. They asked Jafar to perform. And when he started moving, when he started dancing, the room went completely silent because they were not watching someone imitate Michael Jackson. They were watching someone channel Michael Jackson. The mannerisms were not studied. They were natural. The energy was not forced. It was organic. That aura, that indefinable quality they had been searching for across 2 continents, was right there in front of them. That was the turning point. That is when they realized they could search for 10 more years, audition 10,000 more people, and they would never find what was already standing in the room. But if it was so obvious, why did the search continue for 2 more years? Here is the truth. Even though the producers knew Jafar was special, they had to be absolutely certain. Because casting a family member comes with serious risks. Critics would scream nepotism. People would question whether he earned the role or was simply handed it because of his last name. The standard for Jafar was actually much higher than it would be for any outside actor, so they kept the search going. They continued auditioning people, not because they thought they would find someone better, but because they needed to prove to themselves, to the studio, and to the world that Jafar was genuinely the best. And after 2 full years, hundreds of auditions, and a planet-wide casting call, they arrived back at the same conclusion. Jafar Jackson was the only human being who could do this. Now here is where the story gets even more powerful. The final stamp of approval came from the one person whose opinion outweighed everyone else, Katherine Jackson, Michael's mother, the matriarch of the entire Jackson family. She publicly supported Jafar's casting. She said that Jafar embodies her son and that it is wonderful to see him carry on the Jackson legacy. Think about the weight of that statement. Katherine knew Michael better than anyone on earth. She raised him from a baby. She watched him become a global superstar. She witnessed his struggles, his victories, and his pain. If she says Jafar embodies Michael, that is not just a supportive family member speaking. That is validation from the ultimate authority. This was not nepotism. This was the people who knew Michael best saying that Jafar is the one. But that is not all. There is one more layer to this that makes Jafar completely irreplaceable. Let me break down what an outside actor, no matter how talented, could never bring to this role. They could never have the genetic resemblance. Makeup and prosthetics can only do so much. There is something about actual DNA that cannot be faked. They could never have the inherited movement patterns. Those come from growing up inside the Jackson family. The way Jafar moves is not learned, it is instinctive. They could never have the natural vocal tone. That Jackson sound lives in the blood. An actor can train for years, but they would still be imitating. Jafar does not have to imitate, he simply is. They could never have personal memories of Michael. You cannot research what it felt like to be at Neverland Ranch as a child. You cannot Google the sound of Michael's real laugh during a private family moment. They could never have the family's blessing, not like this. Katherine Jackson said Jafar embodies her son. She would never feel that same level of trust watching a stranger play Michael. They could never have the spiritual connection. You either have it or you do not. Director Antoine Fuqua saw it immediately. That is not something acting school can teach, and they could never have the lived understanding of what it means to carry the Jackson legacy every single day. Jafar did not research the Jackson name for a film role. He has lived with it since birth. Here is the best way to think about all of this. An actor plays a role. Jafar carries his uncle's spirit. That is a fundamental, and that is something no amount of training, no amount of natural talent, and no amount of dedication could ever replicate. After searching the entire world for 2 years, the answer was sitting there all along inside the family, inside the bloodline, inside the one person who was born to tell this story. So remember that moment I mentioned at the beginning, the moment that changed every 2-year search continued, not because they were looking for someone better, but because they needed to prove to the world that the obvious answer was also the right answer. And Katherine's blessing, that was the final confirmation that they had found exactly what they were looking for. Jafar Jackson was not just the best choice to play Michael Jackson, he was the only choice, because nobody else on this planet carries Michael's DNA, his memories, his family's blessing, and his spirit. This role was never truly cast, it was destined. So there you have it, the real reason Jafar Jackson was the only person who could ever play Michael Jackson. If you found this video interesting, make sure to like and subscribe for more videos just like this. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next one.